All right, the third principle of decision making is that we need, after we've widened our options, after we've got more choices to consider, after we've collected information and reality tested our assumptions about our choices, we've got to choose at some point. And choice is very hard. We sometimes agonize about our decisions. This is a subject of great art. It turns out it works cross species. That poor cat has just realized it has to save for retirement in 9 different lives. And what's interesting is our agonizing doesn't always correspond to the importance of the decision. We agonize very often about minor decisions, like, I don't know if you've ever done what I've done and driven around and wasted a lot of time and gas looking for the cheapest price on gas. And yet the major decisions, the really big ones, like that retirement nest egg, very often we're not spending nearly enough time on those. And so how do we calibrate the short term and the long term, the emotions that we're experiencing in the immediate term with the things that we really want to accomplish in the long term? The villain here is that short-term emotions often interfere with our ability to see the long-run implications of our decisions. We're worried or we're anxious or we're concerned about something in the immediate future, but that prevents us from seeing the long-term goals that we have and are involved in a situation. So what we want to do is to level the playing field between the short-term and the long-term emotions. And one way of doing that is what we're calling adding some distance, stepping back a little bit and looking at the landscape in a way that allows us to see the long-term as in addition to the short-term. Now, culture gives us some advice on this. So for example, one of the hints for adding distance is to sleep on it. And very often that works. So if we've got an important personal decision, if we've got a purchase that we're thinking about making, sometimes getting 8 hours of sleep helps us wake up with fresh eyes and a fresh perspective. And it becomes clear to us what we should be doing in a situation. But sleeping on it takes a while, takes 8 hours, and it's kind of unreliable. That's why I love Susie Welch's advice. She's a business columnist, and she has a proposal that whenever we have a major decision, what we should do is we should think 10-10-10. What are the implications of my decision 10 minutes from now, 10 months from now, and 10 years from now? Now, I think there's no single piece of advice that is more useful and more compact than Susie Welch's 10-10-10. So suppose I'm agonizing about whether I should confront a team member who's not contributing to the team. Well, I hate those conversations. And so 10 minutes from now, I'm filled with anxiety and dread about having that confrontation. But then I think 10 months from now, if the conversation goes well, this is a valuable person. That's why we added him to the team. And 10 months from now, to have him contributing to the team would be wonderful. And on the downside, if the conversation doesn't go well, in 10 months, we'll probably work through it. We'll have somebody else on the team that's filling that role, and they'll be working out fine. And you know, 10 years from now, it's not going to matter either way. We'll have forgotten about the instance. We'll probably be working for different companies and different jobs. And somehow, getting that spread of time frames helps me focus on what's really important. If we care about the performance of the team in the next year, the 10-month set of outcomes has to overwhelm the dread and anxiety I'm feeling 10 minutes from now. Now, Susie Welch has you focus on different periods of time. But what also turns out to work is to focus on different positions, different perspectives, to add some social distance. So let me give you an exercise that was given out by psychologists to college students. So I want you to imagine you're back in college and how you would have reacted to the following situation. You're thinking of calling someone from your psychology class who you like, but you've only talked with once. You're afraid he or she won't remember who you are when you call. Do you, A, wait until you talk some more before you call? B, call now? Now, I'm not in the room to watch you raise your hands, but go ahead and raise your hands for one of these options. How many people choose option A? I would have waited to talk some more before calling. Look around the room. Now, how many people would have done B? Call now. If you're like most groups that I've talked with, the ratio goes from 50-50, wait versus call now, to 90-10. I'm going to wait 90% of the time, and 10% of the people say I would call now. But here's what's interesting. Suppose the situation were slightly different. You have a friend who comes in one day and says, I've had the most fantastic conversation. You know, and now I'm trying to decide, should I wait and talk some more, or should I call now? Now I'm going to ask you to vote what you would have advised your friend. How many of you would say, wait until you talk some more before calling? How many of you would say, call now? Notice that the ratio looks quite different in this situation. Almost everybody in this situation recommends to the friend, look, you should call now. And what I want to suggest is that it's not just easier to make the decision for that other friend, it's also, we're making the decision better for the friend. And research in psychology has shown that when we're making recommendations to a friend, we're really good at choosing on what's most important in a situation. When we're in the situation, that anxiety and embarrassment of thinking about calling up and having the person say, who is this? That overwhelms the important issue, because the important issue in college is, can you find somebody that you have a romantic connection with? Can you find somebody that you're really excited about being with? And we see that for a friend, but for us, it's lost in that blur of potential embarrassment. Now, what's useful about this concept is that you can use it in your coaching of your friends. So what I found over time is that this best friend question is really useful at clarifying for people what the most important aspect of a decision is. So somebody will come in with a career decision or a relocation decision, or a, choosing this college versus that college, or this place to live versus that place to live. And what you do is you turn to that person after they've described the decision and say, look, imagine that your best friend were sitting here and they just described the situation that you described to me. What would you advise your best friend? And about 80% of the time they'll blurt out something very quickly and then look a little surprised that it was so easy to make a recommendation to the friend. And the reason for that is, by taking that step back and adding a little bit of social distance, we're in a better position to recognize what's really important in a situation. Now, 10-10-10 and the best friend question help us recognize our core priorities. But once we know our core priorities, it's not always easy to put those into action. If you're the leader of a team, you're not always in the room when the critical decisions are being made. If you're running an organization, there are lots of people making decisions on behalf of that organization, and you can't always be there to make sure that they're making the right trade-offs. That was the situation facing Wayne Roberts, who came into Dell Computer to lead a push into services. So for years, Dell had been selling hardware to various firms, and they would buy computers and they would buy laptops, and they would say to Dell, could you come in and make these things work together? Could you hook them up on a network? Could you set up the printers for us? And that was the business that Wayne Roberts was brought in to finally build. Wayne Roberts is sitting here in the middle of nowhere in corporate headquarters in Dell, and he has people spread out all over the nation. And in fact, within the first 18 months, this organization that he was building went from 20 people to 200 people. And most of the 200 were distributed at customer sites, and they were heavily nocturnal, because what they were doing is taking all those cubicles that people use during the day, and they were running wires from cubicle to wire up the computers into a system that worked for people. And they were constantly faced with decisions that needed to be made, because customers would come to them and say, we forgot to list that cluster on the second floor, but they need to be hooked up to the system too. And you're looking at the contract as one of Dell's representatives, and it's not in the contract. Your hourly wages haven't been priced in. Or they come to you and say, those printers aren't working fast enough. And what you know is that they ordered the wrong kind of printer. They ordered printers that were giving 60 sheets a minute, and now they're wanting 100 sheets worth of throughput. It's their mistake. But the question is, how do you respond to that as the frontline service person? Well, what Wayne was smart enough to do is to come up with a couple of rules of engagement to help make those critical decisions at the time. And here are two of the key rules. Do first, apologize later. Rule number 2, be easy to do business with. Because what everybody in this services organization needed to understand is that even though they might be dealing with a $150,000 services contract, that $150,000 services contract is probably coming on top of a $2 million hardware contract. And so from the standpoint of the customer, the relationship with Dell is a hardware relationship, and what the services people can't afford to do is mess up that relationship. That's why they need to be easy to do business with. Orders for this service component were coming in so fast, people were so excited about this new capacity, that the orders were stacked up. And so if a frontline service person delayed on one account by a day or a half day, every customer that's stacked up behind them all of a sudden gets their service installment delayed by a day. So do first, apologize later is a good rule, because getting the situation resolved as quickly as possible not only makes this customer happy, but all the other customers behind them. What I love about Wayne's rules is they take really complex, tricky issues. I mean, you could have decided either of those issues both ways and justified it completely well. But in the case of Dell, in the case of the services business at Dell, there was only one right answer. And what Wayne was clever enough to do is to come up with easy ways to encapsulate those rules so that everybody in the organization was making the right decision the right way every single time. Now, the advantage of getting your core priorities right, the advantage of taking a step back and attaining some distance, is that decisions become faster. Take sleep on it versus 10-10-10. Well, sleep takes 8 hours. A good 10-10-10 analysis might take 5 minutes. And the compression ratio on that is something like 96:1. So if you want to make your decisions 96 times faster, you might consider attaining some distance. Your role as a decision maker is to focus on what's most important. And a good way of doing that is by stepping back and adding some distance.